Thank you for joining us for another episode of Exposing Scientology, where we reveal what really goes on inside this business masquerading as a church. Hi, everyone. Hi, Lily.
Hi, Mikey. Hi, everybody. Hi,
Happy to see you again. Happy to be
As
back.
always. Yes, always. A pleasure.
Yes.
We have some pretty bulky business to get to today.
We certainly do. There has been quite a bit of activity in the world of the Leah Remini lawsuit, and we are going to address some of those things, starting with the gentleman known as Kendrick Rick Moxon. And Mr. Moxon featured fairly prominently in something that happened in the lawsuit, but I wanted or we wanted to give a little background on just who Rick Moxon is and why it's significant that he is involved in shady, nefarious dealings with respect to those who are speaking out about Scientology all the way to today.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, he has quite a history in Scientology. And I don't know if this is true, but I was told this from someone who he had attempted to make a deal with one of the Jane Does 20 years ago. The Jane Doe's parents made a deal with them. But even prior to that, Mike, I mean, these things I've learned from you. And then subsequently, these things are very much documented. Yeah, so Moxon has a long history of dealing in illegal activity, can I say?
Well, you could say that. You could say that. I mean, he was an unindicted co-conspirator in the U.S. Department of Justice case that they brought against Mary Sue Hubbard and 10 other leading members of the Guardian's office. But I'm going to get to that because Rick Moxon represents the proof of the continuity of Scientology's fair game activities. He spans from the 1970s all the way to present time. Right. And there are examples after example after example of things that he has been engaged in, which demonstrate that the pattern and practice of Scientology just doesn't change. He's like the poster child for fair game in Scientology. He is also an OT8.
What does that mean?
That means that he has attained the highest level of Scientology auditing that is available and has paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to get there, and that he has spent many, many, many years exorcising supposed beings that are stuck to him and his body.
Okay, so that sounds incredible and crazy, and it sounds like you're just talking bullshit and nonsense here. And so I just want to take a second to, not a second, I'm lying. I just want to take a moment to explain what this means. When you get up to the confidential levels of Scientology, so these are the secrets that Scientology attempted to keep private so that, people wouldn't realize, like, what am I sacrificing? My children, my life, my everything, for this shit. So oftentimes, me included, you included, Mike, and any Scientologist who has done the OT levels will tell you, we've all said that that's untrue. What has been exposed and revealed and posted online, by the way. So if you want to see what the OT levels are, you could simply Google Scientology upper levels or OT levels or confidential levels. And some very brave former members of Scientology had taken these confidential materials and posted them online so that people didn't waste their lives and their money on this bullshit. And I've talked about this at length with you, Mike. We've done episodes about what the OT levels are, but not everybody has watched our show or listened to our podcast. So for those who have already heard this, I apologize, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't retained because it's so crazy. So to go over it again, you were taught on these upper levels that the Xenu story that was in Going Clear is true, right? That there wasn't there, how many 75 is a trillion years ago, Mike? I forget.
75 million years ago,
Right.
Leah.
30 million years ago, a planet that looked very much like what we have today was overtaken by an evil, and I'm not kidding you guys, please know. And when people ask us, like, did you guys think this was batshit crazy when you were told the secrets of Scientology, upper levels? We were all like, yes. But as you have mentioned many times, Mike, we always have the carrot dangling of there's something better coming. So we're like, okay, so we'll accept this kind of craziness because I've already been in it 35 years. Right? Like,
Yep.
So you figure there's something better coming, or later they're going to go, ha ha, just kidding, right? Or whatever. So, okay. So Xenu took people, human beings, and dropped them into a volcano. Correct, Mike?
Well, there was a confederacy of 76 planets that were suffering from overpopulation. So Xenu decided to round up a whole bunch of people, people that he didn't like, tax protesters, artists, etc., and freeze their spirits in glycol, and ship them in rocket ships that look like DC-8 airplanes to planet Earth, which was called Tijiak, and drop them in volcanoes and blow them up with hydrogen bombs. Now, why all this was exactly necessary is a little, not really explained. Once he'd frozen them in glycol, he could have just kept them frozen in glycol. But he had to fly them off, millions and billions of people off to this faraway distant planet and drop them in volcanoes and blow them up with hydrogen bombs, and then show them a bunch of films to implant in their minds all of these beliefs that people have today, false
beliefs.
Yeah,
right.
all these false beliefs, like Christianity and Jesus and God and all of those sort of things. They're all were lies that were heavily called implanting, meaning stuck into the minds of these poor souls who had been blown up. And those poor souls now have attached themselves to people like normal people that are walking around, and they're stuck on their bodies. We'll be back after a quick break.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? My name is AD, and I'm probably one of the most positive and down-to-earth individuals that you will talk to. I'm all about helping people to find happiness and plan to do so by providing relationship, money, and life advice through my podcast on key values I believe in and live by daily.
Right. Now, for those of you who have zoned out because you think you were listening to absolute nonsense, this is the actual confidential levels of Scientology at a cost of hundreds of thousands of dollars. Most civilian Scientologists, especially staff members, don't ever make it even onto the OT levels. And you'll hear Scientologists say, when giving up their children and disconnecting from their fathers and mothers, my eternity is at stake. So they believe that they will not remember, because Scientology sells that you are going to live another life, and part of the psychiatrist planned that you will not remember this life. You won't remember. So it's all part of the psychiatric
conspiracy
theory. So it just is actually insane. But we've all done it, and we were like, okay, well, we're taught that the Scientology lie detector doesn't lie, and we're just supposed to run these spirits out. So it's an exorcism, basically. Now, when people get to the level called operating Thetan, which means spirit, 7, they are on this level for 5+ years. Okay. So you are talking about a person when you're talking about an OT7 and an OT8, like we're talking about Moxon and his wife. You're talking about people who have been talking to entities that don't exist for 10+ years at this point, because they had to do then OT8, right?
Yep.
So we are all consumed with these beings that make us believe in God, that make us believe in mental health, and we have to exercise these billions of beings that are attached to us. On OT5, you cure yourself. They're called BTs, by the way. They're called body thetans, so body spirits and clusters. And we're supposed to rid ourselves of these body thetans and clusters, and therefore would be freeing ourselves of cancer or any ailment that we have on OT5. So just so you know, I just want you to know who you're dealing with when you're dealing with OTs of Scientology. And that is people who have been talking to fucking beings that don't exist. So I don't know, like, I wish a psychologist would weigh in on this. But when you see somebody on the street, Mike, talking to somebody who doesn't exist, like, that's what we're talking about. A person who thinks that they have body thetans connected to them, and they've been talking to them and exercising them out of their body. Okay, that's who we're talking about. We're talking about Moxon, OT8.
And here he is, proudly displaying his OT8 certificate, which all Scientologists are so proud of, these big pieces of paper that they get for their hundreds of thousands of dollars of expense.
My mother included.
Yeah, everybody. And this is his wife, Carla. In fact, this is a screenshot from a video that you can see there. I kept the title of the video, which I will link to in the description of this.
Mike, please, because again, this is just evidence of it. Listen, I take the piss out, right? But ultimately, when we're talking about these people, we're talking about mentally unwell people. And if you watch the video, she is the epitome of an OT. She is the epitome of a Scientologist. Now, if you're a Scientologist and you say, hey, I saw that video of Carl, it's a little, you know what I mean? Which I've been accused of when Tom was jumping on couches on Oprah, and I complained to Scientology, my Scientology handler, that he might be coming undone or was undone, and now the world's seeing his mental state. I was told, Mike, that I wasn't a high enough tone to understand these people. Okay, that I was somehow broken, that I saw these people and like Carla as something odd. No, I was told by Scientology, there's something wrong with you, Leah, if you see something wrong with that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this video it's hard to describe. It is like a Saturday Night Live skit.
And yet it is.
Literally. Like the one where they talk about the alien, they have these little skits talking about, I was abducted by the aliens.
Yeah.
And that is literally what this video is like. I'm not going to go into a long description of it because it's just so out there. Like I said, I will include a link. You can go look at it if you wish. It is cringeworthy beyond comprehension. But the significance of it and why Leah and I are bringing it up is because these people are prominent. Carla and Rick Moxon are prominent Scientologists that are sent to do Scientology's dirtiest work. Carla Moxon is also, she's not a lawyer like Rick is, and she's not off doing various things with people who are suing Scientology. She works with CCHR and other of the Scientology front groups and is a highly regarded Scientologist who is an example to other Scientologists that they strive to achieve. The same with Rick. He is someone that Scientologists look up to as an example of this is a good Scientologist. This is what good Scientologists do. And wait until you hear what Rick Moxon and Carla Moxon do, because that's what we're going to go into. And we're going to start way back in 1977. You may be familiar with the fact that in 1977, the Federal Bureau of Investigation raided Scientology organizations in Los Angeles and Washington, D.C. And they took thousands and thousands of pages of documents that were highly incriminating, and they demonstrated that Scientology had been engaged in the largest spying, infiltration, theft operation against the U.S. government in history. And it wasn't just against the U.S. government, but a lot of it was focused on the U.S. government. At that time, both Rick and his wife, Carla, were members of the notorious Guardian's Office in Washington, D.C. And the Guardian's Office was the organization that preceded the Office of Special Affairs. It was established by L. Ron Hubbard in 1966 to, quote, protect Scientology from governments, from, quote, attackers, from the media, from disaffected, unhappy Scientologists, basically from anybody who wasn't forwarding the Scientology party line, but was saying something that more than likely was true, but Scientology didn't like. So both Rick and Carla were actually engaged in the activities that the government prosecuted Scientology for. They were both unindicted co-conspirators. And what that means is that there was evidence collected that would potentially cause them to be prosecuted. There was valid evidence that they had done something wrong, but that it didn't mean that they were going to spend their time prosecuting them as sort of peripheral people. They would focus on the actual 11 conspirators that they considered were the worst offenders. But in the course of that prosecution, there was a thing called a stipulation of evidence that was filed in the case. And that stipulation of evidence meant that the defendants, Mary Sue Hubbard and the other Scientology officials, and the government agreed that the facts that they laid out in this long document were all true. And I'm going to show you a couple of excerpts from this stipulation of evidence, because this highlights just who Rick and Carla Moxon are, and the fact that they have been involved in this stuff since at least 1977, which is when this is from. This is, as you can see, all this titled stipulation of evidence, and I've excerpted 2 paragraphs here. Thereafter, Herman, who is one of the people who was prosecuted, left the building and waited in a car in the driveway of the museum with Don Alverzo and Carla Moxon, the assistant guardian communicator in the District of Columbia, and overheard and taped the entire meeting over the FM radio of the car. Following the conclusion of the meeting, the defendant Herman re-entered the IRS building, removed the bugging equipment from the conference room, took various papers, including the agenda for the meeting, which had been left by the participants. This is a very infamous incident of Scientology bugging a meeting in the conference room at IRS headquarters in Washington, D.C., where they were set to discuss the subject of Scientology's tax-exempt status. They went in and placed bugging devices in the conference room, which were recorded on the radio of the car that they sat in the museum across the street. And Carla Moxon was one of those people.
So just so everybody knows, that's illegal. because listen, Mike, the thing is that what I think we're still trying to communicate to the general audience, to the public, is that Scientology, through the Guardian's office, which is now called OSA, and naming her assistant guardian and all this nonsense, right? Sounds all official, right? This is Scientology's secret police, where they continue to think that they're superior to law enforcement, our own government agencies, and are still doing the same shit today. So when people say this is history, no, it isn't history. It's still going on today, because Scientology policy is not allowed to change. And so anything concerning dealing with the quote unquote attackers of Scientology will be the same. However, they achieve the goal, which is a silenced or muzzled, meaning that they have silenced me, muzzled me, silenced Mike, silenced a journalist, muzzled us. Mike, even people that I have explained this to, they go, what does that mean, muzzled? I go, what does it mean? Think of a muzzle on a dog's mouth. That's what the actual policy says.
Right.
That the goal of this department of the Guardian's office, that is now named OSA, Office of Special Affairs, is to silence or muzzle anyone. Doesn't matter if you're a Scientologist, doesn't matter if you work for the government, it doesn't matter if you're a police officer, it doesn't matter. They want to silence or muzzle you, and that is the goal of the department statistic, Mike, is an obliterated, and that's the word, obliterated attacker. So if you're a comic, you're considered an attacker. If you're a cop investigating Scientology or a Scientologist, you're an attacker in their mind. You do a welfare check on a family member, Scientology considers you an attacker. Go ahead.
Absolutely correct.
Yeah.
And just one other point about this, Leah, is it is further evidence, as if we really needed any,
apparently
that Scientologists believe that breaking the law with the end objective of, quote, benefiting Scientology is perfectly okay.
Completely.
It is completely and utterly okay to break the law if you are doing so on behalf of Scientology.
I thought that. So did you, Mike. I mean, we both.
Of course.
We're totally okay when we were talking about silencing attackers when we were in, right? You know, hiring hackers to hack attackers, you know, computers, phones, like this was all okay. Under the guise of we're saving mankind, right? And the only person that's saving mankind is Scientology.
Yep. Okay, so let's go on. This is now the next excerpt from that same stipulation of evidence. And I am going to explain this a little because there's some significance in here that people won't understand if they're not familiar with the story. So Rick Moxon at the time was the head in October of 1966. He was the head of the legal department of the offices of the Guardian's office. And he submitted an affidavit with 9 pages of handwritten material. And in the affidavit, he was stated he was unable to locate the file of Mr. Meisner. And I'm going to explain who Meisner is. However, as the defendant Raymond stated to Mr. Meisner in a meeting, Mr. Moxon had been directed to supply the government with fake handwriting samples in lieu of Mr. Meisner's true handwriting exemplars. Now, Michael Meisner is or was a member of the Washington, D.C. Guardian's office who was caught with fake ID papers infiltrating the IRS. And he was then being charged with crimes, and the Guardian's office took him and flew him to Los Angeles and held him in a safe house away from the FBI. He was supposed to be going back to testify or appear before a grand jury. I don't remember all of the
obstructing justice. I mean, amongst other things.
I mean, obstructing justice is putting it very nicely.
Yeah.
He was actually held against his will, i.e., kidnapped and held in these safe houses with people watching him 24/7. And when they thought that maybe the FBI had figured out where they were, they moved him to another safe house. The way they moved him, they handcuffed him and stuffed a tennis ball in his mouth and threw him in the floor of the back of a car and drove him to the next place.
Mike Rinder.
I'm not kidding. This is all in these documents, Leah.
Unbelievable.
And what happened was he then decided that he was going to play nice with the Scientology handlers until they let up and sort of let their guard down, at which point he escaped. And he went straight to the FBI in LA. The FBI took his statement. They used that to get the search warrants, and that's how Scientology was raided by the FBI in 1977.
Wow. What a blessing. What a blessing, Mike, because as I think about those documents, you know, Paulette Cooper was about to go to prison for being framed by Scientology. Gabe Casares, the former mayor of Clearwater, he was being framed for crimes he didn't commit by Scientology. Like, you think about all these documents, and guys, you could see these documents again just by Googling it. Operation Snow White, dirty operations of the Guardian's office, Scientology, crimes. You could find these documents by the FBI, by the way, not us, we didn't put this out, right? The FBI, this is actual FBI documents of what they uncovered in this raid. And so what a blessing.
Yes.
Where is this, Michael, today?
Meisner?
Yes.
He basically went off. I think Tony Ortega tracked him down at some point. He became, I think he worked in a nuclear plant in Massachusetts or somewhere, but he never wanted to talk.
Wow.
He's never wanted to speak out about what happened or,
it would be amazing because I don't know if he realizes how many people he saved.
Yes, I know.
It's because of those documents, Mike, that people are able to substantiate it, sort of, because people still think this is in past tense, right?
Yeah, old.
And it isn't. It isn't. They're still continuing to do the same exact activities that they did when it was at the Guardian's office. But anyway, if he ever listens to this, we owe him
a huge debt.
Yes.
A huge debt.
Yeah. Okay.
So there we go. There are the Moxons back in the mid-70s, up to no good, carrying out fair game activities against the United States government. And when Leah and I talk about fair game, and we've explained this before, but it really bears repeating as often as possible. We are talking about the broad subject of Hubbard's directives of destruction of the enemies of Scientology. And at one point in the mid-60s, he said that these people were fair game, but it caused bad PR. So he wrote a policy letter saying, I'm canceling the use of the term fair game, but I'm not changing anything about how we treat SPs. And subsequent to that, Scientology has claimed, we don't have anything called fair game. It was canceled. There's no such thing. Not true. The policies on handling suppressive people and attackers of Scientology are exactly the same today as they were in 1976, as they were in 1959, when he first said that we hire private investigators to intimidate people, harass them, and do, quote, noisy investigations to shut them up.
And cost them their job. Yeah.
Yes. So let's just take a little look at some of the history of these things that Moxon has been engaged in. Because like I said, he's the poster boy for Scientology fair game. He is the continuity that goes from at least the mid-70s all the way to today.
Correct.
When Scientology was battling the IRS, Rick Moxon was very, very prominent in that. He filed lawsuits on behalf of Scientology, but he also brought hundreds or made hundreds and hundreds of Freedom of Information Act requests to different IRS offices all over the country, and then filed numerous lawsuits when the documents either were inconsistent or not turned over, et cetera, et cetera. But more than that, he is the person who hired the PIs who were sent in to investigate individual IRS agents and establish a fake news bureau called the Washington News Bureau to distribute and disseminate the false info or the incriminating, quote, information that had been dug up by the private investigators who were investigating IRS agents, attending their conferences, and doing all sorts of nefarious stuff. And we know this because one of those private investigators, a guy called Michael Shomers, eventually decided that what he was engaged in was not right and spilled the beans and said, yeah, well, they said that Rick Moxon got me to do this. I was being paid through him. I got my checks from him. So did the other PIs. This is what we were engaged in, and we don't think it's right.
What was happening, David Miscavige, he, made a big hoop to do about how they harass the individual, like you're saying, the individual IRS agents, right? So again, you think this is a government agency, you think they're going to do something about it. Well, what they did about it is they just didn't want to be harassed anymore. So
they caved in.
They caved, right? And that is the purpose of the harassment, everybody. Not really is just to exhaust, guy A, woman B, right? Who works for the same with our show, right? Our documentary series, right? It was like they harassed the individual men and women who work at, I don't know, I don't want to name a brand name because I don't want them to be harassed, but anybody who advertised on our program, they would get the actual names of the people who worked at these advertising companies and harass them at their house. And so they just say, look, we don't believe what they're saying about Leah or Mike or the program. We just don't want to be harassed in our homes and we have children. So and that's the purpose of it.
We'll be back after a quick break.
Do you want to learn more about the Bible and how it reveals God's plan for humanity? Do you want to discover the connections between the Old and New Testaments? If so, you should listen to Reasoning Through the Bible, a channel that explores the scriptures verse by verse with clarity and insight. Join us every week as we dive into the historical context, theological implications, and answers to questions about each passage to see how they apply to our lives today. Don't miss this opportunity to grow in your faith and understanding of God's Word. Subscribe to Reasoning Through the Bible and start your journey of biblical discovery.
That's exactly right, Leah. I'm glad you brought that up because I don't want people to get the idea that these private investigators uncover incriminating stuff.
No,
they don't.
They don't.
They just create endless headaches and upset and familial problems because they start going after the families of people, and then the families are calling them up. And like you said, it's not that the family members believe anything. It's just I've now got like 5 family members calling me upset because someone was banging on my door wanting to know about you being a criminal. And I'm like, they go,
that's scary. We just don't want to be involved with this crazy group,
Right.
And that has been successful. That's why those who stand up, those who continue to employ and support people who are speaking up and speaking out, is very important. It's very needed. It's far and few between, but there have been many who have stuck by us, Mike, and has stuck by A&E, has stuck by Netflix, and they're not having it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go on to another topic of Rick Moxon infamy, the Cult Awareness Network. Now, for those of you who don't know, there was an organization that was created, I guess, in the late 70s or maybe early 80s called the Cult Awareness Network. And it was run by a woman called Cynthia Kisser out of Chicago. And they endeavored to provide factual information and assistance to families who had members in cults. And they were always considered a big public enemy of Scientology because they would give out factual information about Scientology. So Rick Moxon, under the auspices of the Office of Special Affairs, and by the way, Rick Moxon has an office. His office that he works out of is on the 10th floor of the Hollywood Guarantee Building, the HGB.
And that's a Scientology-owned building on Hollywood Boulevard.
The Church of Scientology International Headquarters building on Hollywood Boulevard. And the 10th floor is the Office of Special Affairs. He has his office in there. So in coordination with the genius minds in the Office of Special Affairs, myself being one of those, came up with a plan on how to get rid of the Cult Awareness Network. And that entailed having a bunch of Scientologists apply for membership in the Cult Awareness Network. And the Cult Awareness Network said, we don't want you as members, because Scientology could bring 50 or 100 or 200 people that they could round up and ultimately overwhelm whoever was running the show there by sheer force of numbers. So they said, we're not falling for this. So Rick Moxon filed lawsuits on behalf of these people saying they were being discriminated against because of their religious beliefs by not being allowed to join the Cult Awareness Network.
Yeah, the same routine, the same speech, the same script that Scientology writes. Go ahead.
Exactly. But that didn't bring about the demise of CAN.
And that was the objective, right?
It was to actually, the objective wasn't even to wipe out CAN. The objective was to take it over.
Oh.
But we'll get to that.
Okay.
Because what happened was Rick Moxon found a client to sue CAN. And this was a very strange circumstance. This guy his name was Jason Scott, and he was a member of some other religious organization, and his mother had contacted CAN and gotten a deprogrammer involved, and he had managed to escape the deprogrammers. And I think what happened was there was a news story about it. Someone in OSA saw it, said, here's a guy that could become a plaintiff against the Cult Awareness Network. Rick Moxon ended up representing him pro bono out of the goodness of his heart, realized that Rick Moxon was being paid a monthly retainer by the Office of Special Affairs. So pro bono is not really pro bono.
Right.
He's being paid by Scientology to represent Rick Scott. Moxon took that case to trial and won a $5 million judgment. I think 1.8 million of it was against CAN and the rest was against the deprogrammer. As a result of that, CAN declared bankruptcy.
Which is a big win for Scientology.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Huge. But it gets worse because there is another Scientology lawyer called Stephen Hayes who sort of hangs around the periphery of OSA, does stuff for OSA and for Rick Moxon. They've been friends forever. And Stephen Hayes went and purchased the assets and name of CAN in the bankruptcy proceeding.
I see.
And Can was actually staffed by people from the Department of Special Affairs in Chicago for a considerable period of time, not letting on that this was now owned by Scientology, just carrying on as the Cult Awareness Network, but now providing, quote, accurate information. Now, there is more to the Jason Scott story than this, because what ultimately happened was that Jason Scott realized that he was being used as a pawn, and he fired Rick Moxon and hired Graham Berry. And
wow.
I'm not going to go into all the details about this because there's just too much. You know, we could do we maybe should do a whole episode one day about Can. But suffice to say that Jason Scott and his mother ended up being extensively quoted saying, you know, Rick Moxon tricked Jason Scott into filing this lawsuit with the promise of making a whole bunch of money. But we were never Scientologists. We never had the interests of Scientologists. And yet that was what Moxon was interested in. He was using my son as a pawn to go after the Cult Awareness Network on behalf of Scientology.
Right.
And we don't think that that was right, and et cetera, et cetera. It wasn't right. That is exactly what was happening. Jason Scott exactly was being used as a pawn to get Can.
Right. And a similar thing is happening, right? Just regardless of me, right? But like a similar thing is what CCHR is built on, which is a Scientology front group called Citizens Commission on Human Rights. Now, this organization solely is out to destroy psychiatry. I mean, out to destroy it. So they are out there with, like, you know, the anti-vaxxers, right? And like, you know, they have infiltrated these groups appearing as though they mean well, that they, you know, they're trying to give data about over-drugging our children and diagnosing or misdiagnosing our children with ADHD, you know, and parents, Scientology parents are on this bandwagon. And what people don't realize is this has nothing to do with Scientology giving a shit about your children, about being misdiagnosed, about being overly drugged, overprescribed medication, abuse in the field of psychiatry, malpractice, all of this, right? You would think, wow, look at this good group trying to help people. No, what they have an agenda, and that is Scientology wants to replace psychiatry. They want to replace psychology. Part of the mission of Scientology, and this is all in writing, Mike, and you should post this so people can see it with their own eyes. The objective of Scientology is to take over government agencies and replace what all major institutions of the world are using to educate our children, drug programs, you know, rehabilitation, like all of this. They want to replace with Scientology technology.
Right. Bring the governments and organizations of the world into full compliance with the teachings of L. Ron Hubbard.
L. Ron Hubbard and Scientology.
Yep.
So this is just another example of that. Sorry, go ahead.
Yes. And just as a little side note, Rick Moxon was, and maybe still is, a commissioner of the Citizens Commission on Human Rights.
Yes, yeah.
And Carla has been a spokesperson for the Citizens Commission on Human Rights.
Right.
So let me just run through a couple of others.
Go ahead, baby.
There was this guy who was an internet activist called Keith Henson, who used to come and protest outside of Gold. Rick Moxon was the guy who filed an injunction order on behalf of Ken Hoden, who was he was called the port captain. He was like the PR person for Gold, and got an injunction against Keith Henson. Ultimately, Keith Henson was prosecuted for a joke that he put on the internet about sending a missile through David Miscavige's window. And through the influence that Scientology had over the prosecutors and agencies in Riverside County, Keith Henson was charged and actually fled the country rather than going to prison.
Wow.
There's another example. A young man named Daniel Montalvo escaped from Bridge Publications I guess this was in 2010-ish. Daniel Montalvo was basically a kid who had been raised in Scientology and had joined the Sea Org at a young age and had worked at Bridge Publications. He was child labor, literally, who had worked on their equipment there, making books. He chopped off the end of one of his fingers on one of the machines that they were using. They have no safety equipment. He was underage. He hadn't slept. I mean, the story was horrendous. And he reached out to originally Tom DeVocht, whom he knew, because he saw something and it mentioned Tom DeVocht. He tracked him down. He reached out to him. Anyway, way before the Aftermath Foundation existed, we worked to help get Daniel Montalvo out of Bridge and flew him from Los Angeles to go stay with Tom DeVocht. But when that happened, his family, his mother and other relatives they found out where he was, and they started saying, you've got to come back. You've got to route out properly so you're not declared. And, the whole shooting match. Well, when Daniel Montalvo left Bridge, he took some...
And Bridge is another front group for Scientology. It's
the publications organization that print Hubbard's books.
Yeah.
When he left, he took... I can't even remember what form it was. It might have been a thumb drive. It might have been CDs. It might have been... it was some form of media that had a bunch of his music on it.
Okay.
But also on the media were records from Bridge Publications because he, by that point, after having chopped off the end of his finger, he was taken out of the manufacturing area and was working in what they call treasury with their financial records, and had financial records. When the people who helped him escape found out about that, they told him to send it back immediately, which he did. And there is a lot more to this story, Leah, about what happened and how that was returned, and the FBI got involved. But what happened relating to Rick Moxon is another one of he did the dirty business for Scientology, because the family persuaded Daniel Montalvo to return to Los Angeles, and they put him in touch with Rick Moxon, who said, if you come back to Los Angeles, we'll put you in a hotel. You don't have to go back to the organization. We just want to make sure everything's done correctly. You get all the papers, blah, blah, blah. Daniel Montalvo arrives in Los Angeles and is picked up, and instead of being delivered to a hotel, is taken to a lawyer's office in Century City, where he is debriefed. And Rick Moxon then shows up with an LA County sheriff and claims that the media was never returned. Therefore, he was a thief. Therefore, he was charged with grand theft and taken by the sheriff and put in prison in the LA County jail for 70 hours until one of the other former COX people came and bailed him out. Now, this is again another example of, we will do anything. We will use any means. We will use the law officers. Remember, this was the time of the LA County Sheriff when Lee Baca was the sheriff.
And Lee Baca is a big fan of Scientology.
Right, until he went to prison for being a crook.
Right.
So there he is again. And there's way more to the Daniel Montalvo story. Subsequently, what happened, there was a lawsuit filed, and now Rick Moxon is involved in intimidating him into settling the lawsuit for nothing.
Now, I want to say this, Mike. I want to be very clear. I don't think, and any ex will agree who's speaking out against Scientology, criminality, and abuses, right? We do not condone any threats against Scientology or Scientologists, including David Miscavige, okay? Any harm to come to Scientologist or any member of the staff of the Church of Scientology. So it's not that the guy didn't say something that I think could be, scary, right? Like, well, I want to throw a rocket through the window. You know what I mean? That could be, because that has been done to us by Scientologists currently. Those
Right.
kinds of threats, right? Those are credible threats to investigate. However, we have never been investigated for any crime, although Scientology has accused us of inciting hate crimes and murder, intentionally knowing that those things are false. Here's what I just want to make a point about, Mike. Not that those things are right, those things are wrong, but actually, Rick Moxon doesn't give a shit about it. What they give a shit about is that they have something that they can use to silence their enemies or people they consider enemies, right?
Yes.
Because they are not moral. Scientology is not moral. It is not concerned with the law clearly. What they are in the business of is silencing advocates. They are in the business of silencing credible organizations like CAN, right? That was really put there to help people to get out of cults, because there is no organization, right? Or there was no organization doing that at that time. Silencing people who could go to the authorities, framing these people so that they can muzzle them and silence them as per the objectives of the Guardian's Office and OSA today. So I just want to make that point, Mike, that because some people can say, well, yeah, they should be, if he did take something, if he did steal something from the Church of Scientology, that is wrong. They are willing to let it all go if you're willing to shut your mouth or if you're willing to lie on their behalf.
Yeah, particularly the latter.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is where, and here we come to the next example. Here's another Moxon greatest hits.
Mm-hmm.
You all may remember that David Miscavige's father left the Sea Organization or escaped the Sea Organization, and he was being followed by private investigators. And eventually those private investigators were caught, and they had a trunk full of illegal weapons, silencers, and they ended up being prosecuted. Or that too is a long story.
Yeah.
The point of this one is that they said that they were paid by Moxon, and that Moxon paid them $16,000 after they had been arrested and kept them on the payroll for 2 years. Why? So they would never talk. So that they wouldn't spill the beans about what really happened. And they did enough damage in the interviews when they were interviewed by the police, and said that they had been told by David Miscavige that when they thought Miscavige's father was having a heart attack, he told them, if it's his time, it's his time. Don't call 911. But apart from that,
I think the quote was, let him die.
Yeah. Well, I don't even remember what the exact quote was, but no matter what, this was another one. Here we go, covering up these people who had been doing nefarious things. Here's the dirty consigliere showing up to make sure that they don't speak out about what happened by keeping them on the payroll for 2 years. Then we have the tragic story of Rick Moxon's daughter, Stacy, who was a staff member at Golden Era Productions, who had been prevented from visiting with her husband, who was in Los Angeles, because she was not worthy of having time off to see him. And she killed herself and left a note for the people around to know what had happened and why. And Scientology covered that up. And we know this because Claire Headley has spoken about it very frankly and openly with us. And Claire Headley was there at the time in the Religious Technology Center who took care of this and pretended that this was an accident. And Rick Moxon did the same thing. Rick Moxon kept the Scientology party line even in the death of his own daughter, so as not to create bad public relations and ill will for the organization.
Mm-hmm.
Now
this is a story, Mike, that, you know, I get emotional about only because, you know, we've tried to talk about, and I believe her name was Stacy Myers,
yes.
right? Myers.
Yes. That was her married name.
Yeah. And she was a young girl, you know, and if you don't understand the mentality of a young girl who was probably only with the Sea Org member for the first time in her life, right? So, and that, you know, marriages are not marriages, right, in Scientology, and you have to request to see your spouse or child. You don't see them every day. Sometimes they're shipped off. In her case, this was the case. And so it's probably very traumatic for a young girl who had the first love of her life, first experience of her life, and then to be ripped apart from that person. And per Claire Headley, there was a note left, and that note was destroyed by Scientology Sea Org members. You know, when you have a child outside of Scientology, you know, you think about the mentality of like when you were in, Mike, right? Like,
yep.
In regards to your daughter and your son who have remained in Scientology, and think of your son and your bonus son now. What you wouldn't do for them, right, is a completely different mindset, even as a civilian Scientologist.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And imagine the kind of father and mother took Scientology over their own daughter.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
That to me is enough. Like, that to me is enough to show you what kind of disgusting, vile human beings we're dealing with, that he didn't give a shit enough about his own daughter, that he didn't do something about the cover-up of her suicide.
Right. And Leah, just think about it also from the perspective of didn't give a shit about his own daughter, but also about all the other people who were similarly situated.
Yeah.
And that being exposed and that coming out into the open may have saved others.
Everybody who is being held prisoner, even by their own mind, but also physically, at the Gold Base in Riverside County, California, and CST, which is where Shelley's supposedly being held, right, in Arrowhead or Twin Peaks in California. You're absolutely right, Mike. It is so. Anyway, I don't want to go into it because
okay, let's
please.
leave
okay.
that.
Yeah, because I'm going to. Yeah.
I know
another 3 hours. Yeah,
I know.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the issue at hand, which is what brought all this up, which is a recent thing that came to light that Moxon was engaged in Los Angeles, relating to you, Leah. And in this case, it concerns a guy who I have no idea who he is. I'd never heard of him before this past week, named Armando Garcia, who apparently took it upon himself to go pass out pamphlets on L. Ron Hubbard Way. I don't even know how often he did this, but it seems like he made a nuisance of himself, at least in the eyes of Scientology security guards. But then again, anybody walking down the street that says L. Ron Hubbard's a fake is a nuisance and a pest and an attacker in the eyes of security.
And Scientology.
And Scientology.
Yeah.
So apparently they asked him to leave. He got in his car. There was a report that he, in turning his car around, had nudged one of these security guards that were around. I mean, I can envisage this.
We don't even know that how we're repeating the story is accurate because it's so vague, right? Like At one point, it was alleged that he was, nodding off in his car, and a Scientology security guard purposely took his flashlight and tried to blind him so he couldn't see, and he was trying to leave. And Scientology turned this into, this man tried to murder a Scientology security guard.
Right.
Yeah.
So the relevant facts are that he was charged with assault with a deadly weapon, i.e. his vehicle. And this all happened like in May of 2022. And this poor fellow was in prison until April of 2023 when his case came to trial. I mean, how this happens is a little beyond me, but it's not really relevant. But it's certainly worthy of note that even though he had not been found guilty of doing anything because he hadn't even been to trial, he was in prison for 11 months. Oh my God. Okay. But the plot thickens because apparently Rick Moxon approached the public defender who was assigned to represent Armando Garcia in his trial.
Now, just to stop you there, Mike, he approached several because there were three.
Okay.
And I understand that Moxon had been lurking around the hallways, having nothing to do with this case. He didn't represent anyone in the case. He wasn't part of this. It was a case at the public defender's office, right? And it was DA prosecuting, right? The state was prosecuting. Right. So it had nothing to do. It wasn't a civil trial. It wasn't like they were bringing Scientology was bringing the case.
Correct.
Yeah. So there were three public defenders here, and all were approached at some point, several times by Moxon.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah. No. Don't be sorry.
Okay. Go ahead.
The more accurate and more detailed, the better.
Okay.
I'm just trying to, like, every one of these things we could talk for a whole hour about just that one thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, one of these public defenders brought up to the judge that she had received basically this improper approach and proposal by Moxon. And I'm going to pull up on the screen a transcript of some of this proceeding in front of the judge, because she asked that Moxon be excluded from the courtroom because she was going to call him as a witness. And there is a bunch of proceeding that goes on before this where the judge basically ends up saying, Moxon, you're out of here. Get out of my courtroom because you are potentially a witness in this case.
Yeah.
And then this public defender says, thank you. Moxon approached me on, I believe, Thursday when we were sent here for trial. He approached me individually outside of the court doors, and he told me that he, in his capacity as the attorney for what he called the victims in the case, which he said was the Church of Scientology, as well as the main complaining witness or the security guard, he indicated if my client, Mr. Garcia, were to go on the record in some form or fashion to either state to the court during a plea or put in writing, he initially asked my client to apologize for being present and also to indicate that he was present on the date of the incident at the Church of Scientology grounds and did what he did because he was, quote, inflamed, unquote, by documentaries and a potential reality TV show that is currently airing or has aired on Netflix. The specific individual who is producing or responsible for these documentaries is a celebrity by the name of Leah Remini. And Mr. Moxon wanted my client to state on the record that the documentary is responsible for his actions, and the Church of Scientology would be able to go ahead and take these documentaries off the air. Moreover, Mr. Moxon indicated that if my client were to make these statements on the record, he would then ask the DA's office to reduce this to a misdemeanor or even less. He indicated multiple times that he did not believe that my client wanted to do what he did, but he was completely brainwashed or under the influence of these documentaries. Okay, I'm going to comment on this after. I just want to finish reading. The conduct in this case, the defense believes, is highly exaggerated. I don't believe it rises to the level of an assault with a deadly weapon with a vehicle. It's clear that the Church of Scientology, for whom the security guard is employed, has an agenda that is bigger and absolutely unrelated to Mr. Garcia, and they are using Mr. Garcia in this case as a pawn in order to be able to get these documentaries off the air. Mr. Garcia's non-threatening behavior, which could be explained in other matters, is being exaggerated to a crime because they have a bigger agenda. And there is more, but this is all that is relevant because this is absolutely uncontrovertible evidence that not only is Rick Moxon engaged in nefarious fair game activities seeking to unduly influence a person who is being prosecuted for a crime that they ginned up and got him in front of the DA's office for, but that it is all with the purpose of A, being able to smear Leah Remini, and B, being able to then use that to get the aftermath and our podcast and whatever else they complain about, which they complain about everything, off the air, because that is what their objective is. And that is exactly what Leah's lawsuit is about. This sort of behavior. And right now, right here, right in April of 2023, Scientology is once again demonstrating that this, what is complained of in the lawsuit, is exactly what they do. It's not what they used to do. It's what they are doing today. Even after the lawsuit is filed, they are doing it. And this public defender was exactly right. She said, look, they're using my guy, my poor guy, for a greater objective that they have, which is to smear and shut up Leah Remini. And that in this sort of context of a criminal proceeding on the record in a court of law is absolutely mind-boggling.
Enough said.
It is enough said, Leah. It's like
I'm speechless. You know, Mike, like you have just demonstrated, Scientology has a history of committing illegal acts to get their way, to have people not speak, which is our First Amendment rights, our human rights. We have a right to speak. We have a right to exist without this kind of harassment from a $3 billion organization with tax exemption and protections that I don't have.
Right.
That you don't have, Mike. That those who have contributed their stories to the award-winning series, The Aftermath, we're talking stories of people who have been raped, who have been molested, who have been their lives destroyed by Scientology disconnection, by elder abuse. We have covered the stories of victims and survivors of Scientology, and they don't have the right to speak without retribution from a $3 billion organization.
Right.
I just want to end with this. Rick Moxon is a representative of Scientology policy. This is what they stand for. This is who they actually are. So what they show you, their campaigns, their bullshit front groups, This is who they really are. I just hope you listen. Those who support them, those who take pictures with them, those who send them commendations that they line their hallways with. This is who they are, really. Go ahead, Mike.
I want to end with that. That was perfect, Leah.
Okay.
We already made the point. I was just going to reiterate something,
Okay.
and that was a perfect summation of what we hope to communicate, and we will continue to communicate. And thanks for watching all the way to the end for those who have.
And anybody has any advice, anybody wants to contribute to, helping us to gain more help for people who are don't have this platform. If you are part of the bar, if you know how to help in this direction, because I don't believe people like Moxon should have a license to practice law, considering his history and considering his current behavior and inciting. I mean, I don't know what this is called, Mike, but inciting somebody to lie under oath. Now, we have never met Mr. Garcia. We've never had it. As far as I know, what I was told was he really wasn't a big fan of ours, Mike. And we don't know him. We've never met him. We haven't had any communication with this person. But to try to incite somebody to lie under oath that they have committed a crime or alleged crime, there needs to be something in this, considering his past and considering what he has done and what he will do. These are things we know about, everybody.
Yep. Yes, exactly, Leah. Yeah. And you actually touched upon the thing that I was going to say. Now I'll say it. Yeah. The idea, it's not just inciting or encouraging this guy to lie under oath, which we know Moxon has lied under oath and filed false. It is the effort to frame someone for something that they did not do. And this is what happened with Paulette Cooper. This is what happened with Gabe Cazares. This is a pattern and practice of Scientology of framing people for things that they didn't do. And in this case, Moxon was attempting to frame you for inciting this guy to commit, quote, an act of violence. And this is a pattern and practice of Scientology too, and it is going on to this day. And we are going to be doing another video where we're going to go through another example of this that has just come to light. So again, thank you all so much for joining us. Bye for now. We'll see you on our next show, whenever that will be.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you for tuning in. You can find more episodes of Exposing Scientology both on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to check out my best-selling memoir, A Billion Years, My Escape from a Life in the Highest Ranks of Scientology. It's available on Amazon and as an audiobook. Until next time, be well and happy.